This is your cell.
Si eres ladrillo, seré concreto. Si eres oreja, seré Van Gogh. Si eres...
فما كاري ابيض، فما ريكتانجل ابيض فيرتيكال.
تو دي تصور دي. كيك.
I ben het.
Oder bleibt es Utopie? Jeder Mensch weiß, es ist ein Kreis, nimmer verweilt, irre Leid, der Liege treibt, innerlich schreit sich zerreißt.
Hello, welcome to Berlin Critics Week again. We are just back from the weekend. We had a really exciting conference on coherent cinema and, no, I'm sorry. Well, also coherent cinema, but the title of the conference was Coherent Action in Coherent Cinema. So we explored it all, and you will soon be able to see the full recording of our conference online. Also, the debates we will be having from now, we will at some point publish them, but be a little patient, please. So for the moment, this is all happening live. We will be online every evening at 8 p.m. Berlin time to discuss the film selection we are now presenting on our Eventive platform, and I hope you will have the chance to follow the selection and see the programs. We've dedicated a lot of energy in putting them together, and we hope they will create discussions for you as well. We will give some starting impulses here, and we hope to hear from you on all the channels we have. We hope you will send us some questions as well. There's a Telegram group we are currently using, so whenever you want to raise a question during our debates, just tune into the group and send them over, so we will be able to consider them. Also, yeah, I wanted to mention there's 7 programs in total, and the films can be viewed until the end of the week. So until Sunday, you will be able to watch the films on the day and hour you like, and we hope you will watch the programs together as we intended them. In the past, usually we were able to program in the cinema, of course. Currently, you're a little bit more free, but we hope you will consider our programming and watch them in the order we suggested. So you will be on the same sheet as us when we start discussing. But I'm not sure whether this will be true for our guests tonight and how they have seen the films. But we will definitely explore that. Welcome to the debate, Facing Traces. It's a great pleasure to welcome our guests of the night, filmmakers Francina Carbonell, who made The Sky is Red, Suneil Sanzgiri, who made Letter from Your Far Off Country, filmmaker Ruth Beckermann, and film scholar Volker Pantenburg. Welcome. It's great to have you all of us here with us. Hi.
Thank you, Dennis.
I hope our audience has maybe just seen the films. We don't know. So I would suggest we start discussing them right away. Francina, I would like to start with your film, and actually the beginning moment of your film. There's a quote and a courtroom recording, which is audible in the beginning of the film. And there's a line which says, "So we're going to review the facts to see if they fill the requirement to start this oral trial." Obviously, this is not a trial. We want to explore the sensations of your film and what it does to us, and how it works together with Suneil's film as well. But I would like to discover the way you reviewed your material, since it's a work based on 60 hours of footage from the prison fire in 2010, and yeah, let's start with that. How did you review your material?
Yeah. Well, I think the editing process was a really tough process, a really dark process, and not only because of the amount of material. There were hours and hours. It's a trial that there was 3 years of trial, so there was a lot of material, you know, and audios, etc. So it was not only because of the overwhelming of the quantity, but also because they are really difficult images. So I spent many time in the timeline just asking me if this is possible to do, you know, if this is it's possible to make some sense with this suffering. So I think it was really interesting how we review all this material, you know, because we start to make an exercise, you know, to try to find like the holes of each material and of each image. These are evidence material, these are operational images. In some way, they are not like images to represent something, but they are part of an operation. So we start to try to see an image like that and to be very responsibility to that scene. So we start to try to do the exercise of the scan to actualize this quality of evidence. And wow, the images were so fragile, you know, they were so precarious. Like, for example, the surveillance camera tries to avoid the scene, you know, or the reconstructions, the testimonies, like they are really manipulated. So we started to try to make the question of why is this manipulation, you know? And we try to interweave all these different formats and different times also, because there are different times, and try to interweave and make a net of different times, of different emotions and different formats. And I think that the start of the film, for one hand, try to mark like we are in a trial, and maybe the structure of this film is a trial, you know, and we can go to the event and then we can just go to another part, etc. But it was really important for me also go to shoot the jail, you know, because I think that for try to understand this tragedy, it's so necessary to see that overcrowding, you know, to see that flammable space, because maybe we have like this image of the jail of cinema, you know, and movies, etc., that it's like cells for one person and it's all like metal, cold and technologic. But in the real, unless here in Chile, prison is just a crazy place, you know, it's just one big space where all people sleep there and there's no space and there's no air. So it was necessary to me try to enter, to try to dive into the film, feeling that overcrowding and feeling that flammable space, I think.
Can we maybe talk a bit about how you worked with the images themselves? There's quite early in the film already, there's a scene in which firemen are lighting up a mattress and setting it on fire to reenact in a way the catastrophe or the incident happening in the prison. And you're putting down below that, you're putting the sound of the uprising which happened in the prison. So quite early on in your film, it's clear that that you don't leave the images, well, you leave the images as they are, but you combine them with the sound in a different way as they were originally. So can you talk about this image of manipulation?
Yeah.
This idea of manipulating an image as well?
Yeah. Well, I think that our question wasn't like if these images are manipulated or not, because I think all the images in some way are manipulated. So I think the question for us was, what for that manipulation, you know? Why they want to manipulate it, and in which ways they found this manipulation. So I think that for one hand, it was really important to us to try, ¿cómo se dice crudo? In a strong way the materials, that try to see them entirely and try to see all there's blurred parts, you know, like these stains, these black masses that you can say, okay, you can't see anything there, but finally all those little details brings us much more information. So on one hand exists this spirit to try the archive in their original image, you know, but in the other hand, it exists like a spirit of, I don't know, Didi Uberman or Farocki says something that I think it's really beautiful. And he says, it doesn't matter how terrible could be the violence that make these images, but the images not always are in the size of the enemy. So I think in some ways, like, these images exist and we can reappropriate us of those images, and we can contrast other things and make sense in other ways. So I think that the sound was the dimension for us to try to humanize also these images, you know, to try to and make it more sensorial, you know. And that was the way that we found for also make a travel of emotions and affects, you know. And in that way, I think that the sound was pretty amazing as dimension to interweave these different times, you know, and in some way reveals that there's no objectivity, or that the history is not just, I mean, it's not less than contradictions and memories and speculations, and all these fragments and all these speculations of that event is what finally construct a narrative, you know. So it was important for one hand just try to see this original archive, but for the other hand, try to make these connections between different times.
Suneil, your film is also partly based on archive material, but not fully. You also shot some scenes with your, I think, 16mm camera. And since we're talking also about a sense of trace, I was wondering about a scene you put in the film showing a robot based on the model of a politician. It's a figure based on politician Ambedkar, placed in a museum setting, if I understand it right. Could you comment on in which sense this kind of image is for you connected to the direction your film is heading towards, which is a different one, I guess. It's a stronger sense of manipulation in your film, I think.
I mean, to go to the manipulation part, I think that there's I liked the Farocki quote that Francina brought up in terms of, like, you know, just because there's violence behind an image doesn't necessarily mean that the image itself is violent. but I think that, yeah, so in this case, I'm the one that's doing the manipulation versus in Francina's film, where the manipulation is done by the prison guards, or the kind of like lack of what's not there, what's not in the frame, is reveals more than what than the what is in the frame. In mine, it's almost it is in a sense also where if I'm obscuring an image, whether it's through the subtitles or whether it's through the hand animation, or whether it's through any of these other processes of obfuscation, I think that, yeah, there's a decisive difference because I'm the one that's manipulating the image and almost trying to put violence back into the image. It's an interesting kind of parallel where, for instance, I think in some of Francina's images that she chose, through the editing or through, whatever, the images had already been manipulated. And of course, all editing is manipulation in some sense, but the images that we see on screen in Francina's film have been manipulated by, they pre-exist as manipulation in order to obscure justice or to hide the violence and the atrocities. I think a lot of the manipulation that I do is actually embedding further violence into an image that might not be immediately read as violent. So kind of like the violence of everyday life in some sense. And so with the animatronic robot of Ambedkar was, for many people who don't know who B.R. Ambedkar is, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, as he's known in South Asian diaspora. He was kind of the major figure of abolition in relationship to caste. He was at least, he kind of is in a long line of caste abolitionists, dating back hundreds and hundreds of years. But he was really the one who, during independence, was able to become one of the key writers of the Constitution, along with Nehru and along with all these other kind of major freedom fighters. But Ambedkar was the only one who rejected Hinduism and rejected the caste system and rejected the violence that came along with all these things. And he became a Buddhist, and he's an amazing figure in his own right. And so what's happening now is that the BJP, the ruling party, really in an attempt to kind of rewrite history, or to kind of claim Ambedkar as their own, has tried and failed, I would say, to absorb his image back into their kind of ethno-nationalist agenda. So the museum that I enter into, which is kind of a memorial for Ambedkar, it's this beautiful building. I mean, it's literally designed in the shape of a book. So the building itself is a book. And there's all these animatronic robots, holograms, very kind of like both antiquated technology as well as like new technology. There's like lots of like 3D holograms that people are fascinated with, but they're kind of cheesy. But the museum is very beautiful museum. And so I went there and spent a lot of time there, just like observing how this figure, this really important figure, was being presented, because the building and this robot, I guess, were built while the BJP was in power. And so I'm kind of like looking at like for what purpose was this monument, essentially a monument to this really radical figure, far more radical than Gandhi, far more radical than most of the historical Indians that have most people grew up with. So there's a line in the film that says, who plasticity, who gets to mold his figure. And literally I was thinking like, whose hands got to touch the making of this, figure, this animatronic robot? Like, who put the clay around his face, or whatever it is, the putty that creates the kind of like human flesh and the tissue to bring him to life? Who got to do that? So that's kind of what I was thinking.
What you're talking about, infusing a sense of violence into an image, what drives you to use this kind of strategy in relation to a figure of radical resistance?
Yeah, I don't know if what I was speaking about in terms of kind of embedding images that might not be violent immediately with a sense of violence, or of some sense of violence. I don't know if that necessarily applies directly to that scene, but I guess what drives that is the kind of it goes to the unrepresentability of violence, right? Whether it's like scratching on a film, or subjecting a film strip to these natural processes of decay, or whatever. I mean, in certain instances, there's this play where the violence of these flowers, which are saffron flowers, and saffron is obviously it's one of the most beautiful spices and flowers in the world, one of the most sacred, and it's a very sacred flower for Hindus as well. And so you have saffron rosaries everywhere, but saffron's also the most it almost all comes from Kashmir in Iran. So what I did is I just took these saffron petals and laid them out on a strip of film, and when that film was layered on top of this really incredible speech by the actress Shabana Azmi, where she's taking this big radical stand, but it's really just her on screen at a film festival, and you hear from the audience these like shouts, like they're like shouting at her, that's when the flowers come in. And so the flowers, the speed at which they're played and played back on film adds this sense of like violence to the image, because it's paired with this really violent sound at the same time. So I think that there's moments like that I think of, where I'm like adding an extra layer of a dissonance to an image that could be interpreted as violent, or has traces of violence within an image that might not have been seen as violent.
May I ask you a question concerning that scene? For me, this was very interesting to, first of all, I didn't understand if the sounds when the actress speaks are against her or supporting what she says. For me, that was not clear.
Yeah.
And for me, the most violent image was when the film ends and you see these red stripes on white background. I mean, what was it? Was it censored, or that was very violent for me?
You mean at the very, which part are you referring to? At the very end of the film, like the actual?
No, when the actress reads the protest leaflet, there are sounds from the audience which I didn't recognize if they are critical or supporting. And then after 1 minute of her talk, of her reading, the image fades and you see just red on white.
Yeah, so those are the flowers. Yeah, those are the clip ends. It's kind of like that's the end of that clip, and then it
for me it was like censorship, that someone just cut it.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, I guess I'm stopping it, but that was the end of the available footage.
But why was the footage? Why did the footage end there?
Yeah.
With her speech.
Yeah. No, I mean, so that's all the footage that I had from her speech that was available, but someone else essentially cut it short as well. but you know, just to answer that question, yeah, I that was the limit of the available footage that I repurposed. But it is violent. You're right. I mean, that cutting that short in the censorship, so to speak, is violent for sure.
And the sounds, were they supporting her or against?
It's not clear. It's not clear. I mean, I think there's both. I think that there's support and then there's extreme antagonism as well. So it's both. It's a cacophony of sounds. You know, there's people who are shouting, you know, clapping and supporting her, and then there's people who are just like shouting at her. And it's not clear. I mean, but this also happens everywhere in India. Like anytime someone tries to make anything of a political speech, everyone just starts yelling and no one knows what's going on at all. So like, it's not uncommon it's just chaos, you know.
We talked about the notion of dissonance just before. So yeah, I wanted to invite you, Volker, to also comment on how the films connected, since we talked about both of them individually. How was the experience of connecting those two films for you? And of course, you also have your own remark. Just go ahead, please.
Yeah, this first remark, thanks a lot. The first remark was really again on this particular scene, because I was also struck that she was allowed to read this protest note quite long. I mean, if we think of other film festivals or the Oscar ceremony, they would have cut the microphone quite quickly, I guess. So there was this ambiguity that people support the protest, maybe also people behind this ceremony, and then others, it was very present in the scene, and I liked it a lot for this ambiguity. And I think the two films resonate a lot with each other. But let me first maybe add something to El Cielo Está Rojo, because we spoke about this first. And what I think is quite interesting is always when certain images are made in a certain context. In this case, it's clearly a disciplinary context first, like the surveillance footage, and then they change the context. And the first change that they make is into the legal process of having this investigation, which is, as you show, totally flawed and manipulated, and still part of the disciplinary process. And then you come along and you kind of transform these images into something like your film. And I think what happens there, if it succeeds, and I think it does succeed, is that you manage to have the images testify against themselves and start some kind of a counter investigation almost. And I think this always brings up also the question of the possibilities of the aesthetic, if we might call it this way, and also maybe the limits, because I guess the hope that comes along with a film like yours is also to reopen the case 10 years after, to reopen the case, maybe not in a literal sense that it's again coming to trial, but at least reopen the case for us and for a potential wider audience and have these things reconsidered. And I think this is something quite powerful. And it's, since you evoked Farokhi, I mean, there's this film Prison Images and the installation version of this. And he was able to get a lot of this footage also by activist groups. And this is a question that I have maybe, if a film like this also participates in a certain activist context, I guess, if there's also the idea to somehow bring it back into this, let's say, more explicitly political context and have it resonate in this particular community or the carceration system in Chile, which would be great, of course. But I don't know if there's any chances of doing this. So this is, first of all, a question to Francina, before I can also talk about the two films.
Yeah, well, I think it's a film that is very close, inevitable to the cause. And from the beginning of the project, we were really in touch with the organization of the families that calls 81 Reasons. And it's the organizations that, well, all this time, they were trying to appellate to reopen the trial. So it's really a question also for me, you know, like the question of what can a movie do, or what kind of movie can contribute to a political action, you know. It's a really question for me. I don't have an answer for that. I think obviously our spirit and our intention when we also worked with the families and the victims and the survivors was to try to make process of justice in some way, you know, because this really, well, what happens was not really surprising when it happens, because fire prisons really abounds in our country, you know. But in this case, it was so big that I think we really expected responsibles. But in this case, as in the others, there were no responsibility, you know. And I think that finally that tragedy reveals that we live in a country where persons don't have same rights, nor have same justice, nor have the same treatment. So yeah, it's difficult to say, you know, because, well, the past year, salió como, I will make a translate. Salió como la...
¿Conmemoración?
No, de que les dieron las platas.
They gave money to them, retribution.
Yeah, sorry. Last year, after 10 years, justice make us a little retribution to the families in money. But it was just like something really perverse, you know, like some of the families, a mother had a misery of money. So it was like, again, a closed door in the justice process. And all the process, it was so precarious, you know, in all the stages. But obviously there are poor people, they don't have all the medias. It is also a topic that is so difficult to talk in a public spaces, you know. There are no politicians that wants to be next to that topic because it's not very economical, you know. It's not, no one wants to hear it. So it is a real question, what is going to happen with this movie, you know. I don't know what is going to happen. I obviously made this movie also to try to speak more and try to dive to this conflict, because it is a conflict in our society. It is like, I think, the darkest part of our penal system. And it's obviously an institution that is like of the 20th century, you know. And the evidence says that this punish logical, it's not given like something good. So yeah, I think that maybe the objective is just to try to push to talk to something that is a little bit, ¿cómo se dice about? Hidden in our public speech, you know.
In a way, your images are transmitting a sense of confrontation, maybe, and there comes the aspect of facing, which we were discussing a lot in relation to your films. So I'm pretty curious, Volker, Suneil, and Ruth, how you perceive this term in relation to Francina's film. Are we facing the present or the past, maybe the Chilean past and present through these images? And what does this term of facing an image imply, or a reality to you in comparison to, for example, seeing an image? Yeah. Or was this a term even which connected for you with the film at all?
First of all, I wonder, after Francina, or after what you said about the situation in Chile, which seeing your film and knowing about this incident is horrible, at least in the justice, in the prison system. But how could you get the material? I mean, you were able to get the material from the surveillance cameras. And second, you got the sound material from the trials. Correct me if I'm wrong. And
Yes.
you got third, you got material from the investigation. Material the police or whoever investigated filmed. So these were the three sources for you. Is that right?
The reenactments?
Yeah.
I don't understand the last question. Sorry.
You got, you had different sources. The surveillance cameras, you had the sound, only the sounds of the trial.
Yeah.
And you had the material from the investigation, the reenactment.
Yes.
Was there anything else?
Cell phones.
Yeah, there are cell phones, the messages of the cell phones and video cell phones of the prisoners of the other tower.
Ah, okay.
There were another format. I don't know if that's the question.
Yeah, I wondered if what you shot yourself, I mean, and I wondered if I got it right, which materials you used for the film. And how did you get them? I mean, what you said about the system in Chile, I mean, I wondered how you managed to get all this material. I think I wouldn't be able to get sounds of a trial 10 years, that happened 10 years ago in Austria, or videos from the surveillance cameras in the prison.
Yeah, well, first I have to say, it is a work with a lot of obstacles, you know. So I spent many years trying not only to try to obtain rights, to try to have the rights for enter to the prison to shoot. And it was a really strange situation, because all the materials that are part of a public trial, they are publics, you know, they are public's archives, and you can use these materials. So in this trial, there were like a screen where the police officers shows these images. So all the material that is shown in a trial is public. But it is a really difficult case because the investigation was so obviously bad and it was so precarious, you know, that obviously the justice system didn't want to show that material, you know. It was like, and for the other hand, it is a really sensible case, you know. But all the families and the organization, they had part of these materials, and also the lawyers of the case had these materials. So finally, we were like in this weird space that we have the rights, obviously, of the archives, but we couldn't get it through the official way, you know. And we had like people there in the system justice that they said, okay, that I know I can pass you these materials, but it will not happen, you know, because there are so many errores.
Mistakes.
There are so many mistakes in that investigation, and it's so manipulated that it was something very high in all those archives. So yeah, it means a lot of obstacles and a lot of rounds and bureaucratic process to get these materials.
So we are already tracing tracing the images back to where they come from.
Yeah.
Volker, how important is it for you when you see the film, when you experience the film, to understand the trajectory of the images, where they come from, how they've been selected?
I think the important thing is that there's some kind of transparency. I mean, nobody has to explicitly tell me this image comes from here, this image comes from here. But I think in the context of the film, it's quite clear, as Ruth Beckermann also said, we get a sense that this is material that is from the case. Not all of it. I guess the very first shot, the traveling shot in the prison, and the last one, they are clearly shots that you did. I was quite sure about. But for the rest of the material, and also the decision to have the files, the Xeroxed files that are also, I think, the background of the end credits, etc. It's quite clear that this is documents of a certain sort, and I think this is one of the tasks and maybe one of the responsibilities of a filmmaker, to be transparent and clear about this without necessarily having a disclaimer right at the beginning, but it has to be clear from the construction, from the form of the film, that there's a responsible way of dealing with these images, and this is what is successful in your film and also in Suneil's films. I think Suneil's film. I think what it also brought to my mind is what kind of spectatorship these two films provoke or maybe invite us to have. And I was wondering, especially also with Suneil's film, it was very hard for me to get all of it when I watched it for the first time. So I was thinking that, of course, there have always been films that invite a second kind of viewing or a third kind of viewing. But in your case, I almost had the impression that it requires a second kind of viewing, or it's meant to be watched several times. And if I bring this together with this form, like the desktop format in a very broad sense, I was pretty much thinking that this is also the native context of this is today's image world, is the web, is the way of connecting things, the way you do it. And I found this really, really interesting, even if the desktop format is, I don't know, it's maybe 6 years old by now, or 7, 2013, 2014, first films came up. But what I had never seen before is that the 60mm frame with the perforations and with this whole 60mm Anmutung, I don't know, it's a German word, but that this is kind of the basis from which the look, yeah, maybe the look, that this is the basis from which you organize all the material. And I found this really interesting, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this decision to have this so prominently. Also the glitches that are typical of 60mm analog film material, it seemed to be very important in the film, and I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I think that so there was a few different questions, I think, in your response, and the first one that I picked up on was this kind of questioning of how much a viewer, and this is something that yeah, this is like really important territory for me as a filmmaker, is like how accessible are my films. And specifically, so like this film, Letter from Your Far Off Country, is the second in a line of work. The first film is called At Home But Not at Home, and this film is kind of like a follow-up film. And At Home But Not at Home, I made it in 2019, but it also premiered in 2020. And it kind of, it was more of a desktop kind of feel, but it combined lots of different things, 16 included, and drone videography and animations and all sorts of other stuff. But that was a more palatable for a lot of people because it had more of a kind of some more of like a journalistic approach to it, perhaps. This was definitely more of an experimental work. And it combined elements of that first film, and now I'm on my third. But to the question of like what is accessible to people and what is not, I mean, primarily this film is for Indian audiences. This is for South Asian audiences, and I made it for them. I mean, it's kind of a love letter to the movement, you know, because a lot of these references are picked up from activists in the South Asian community. You know, these kind of like a lot of these like songs and chants and reference points are and like figures and names and dates and numbers, like these are all things that are regularly circulated in activist circles in the South Asian diaspora, from protests I would go to here in New York to protests that were in India, or just things that would be circulated across the global kind of activist scene, with this kind of liberation lens, the liberation of Dalits, the liberation of Kashmiris, the liberation of Muslims in India, and yeah, in that kind of true diasporic sense, you know, the kind of erasure of borders that we're after, the violence of borders. And so, you know, when I think about like, is this work accessible to non-South Asian audiences, I sort of don't care, you know, and I love the response that I've gotten from people who are not South Asian, who don't understand the references entirely. You know, maybe they'll pick up on a few, or, you know, best case scenario, people do the research, you know, and a lot of people have, and I'm like, good, you know, that means that there's something working, that it's the form itself is intriguing enough that it makes people want to learn more, right? I mean, it's very different than if I had just made a documentary about these protest movements and like the history of them. I have no authority on that at all. You know, that's not, I entirely want to resist that framing of a narrative because it's not my place, you know, like I belong to this diaspora. These are my people. I love them very dearly, and I care about all of our liberations. And especially at this moment when there's so much persecution that's going on, that's ongoing, that's lasted hundreds of years. But you know, this isn't my direct lived experience. You know, the film kind of ends on this question. It's like, you know, how we comprehend, how we connect is up to us. That's, I think, the closing line of the film. And it's a call to say, like, this is how I connect to my people and to my people's struggle and to our diaspora, into our collective liberation. And, you know, it's a call to say, like, it's on you now, like, you know, find out how you connect either to this struggle or to another struggle that you find yourself called to. And so I think that the reason I delivered this in a purposefully more experimental and ambiguous, and or maybe not ambiguous, but abstract kind of, there's a certain level of abstraction that exists within a lot of these works that harkens to a lot of different you know, video art, you know, formalist film, kind of like, you know, the more like 70s kind of experimental films, like the direct animation, and then also like, yeah, desktop cinema, new media, and then also like just there are elements of there that are documentary, but they're all mediated by something, you know, and then also just the epistolary format, you know, very much the essay film, you know, the kind of standard Chris Marker delivery, but it's also that relationship hinges on the relationship with my father. So there's a lot at stake for me personally as a filmmaker, because this is about an investigation into my ancestry, an investigation into ancestors, literally, the people who came before me. And it's a continuation, right? This is one film and a series of works that are all kind of thinking through cinema and liberation and decoloniality. And so, yeah, I mean, the framing of the 16 millimeter was to give it that frame, literally, to format, to point to the edges of the work itself and to say, this is a film. This is first and foremost a piece of art. It is first and foremost meant to provoke questions. It's not meant to answer any questions. it's meant to be experienced sensorially and immediately and viscerally. It's not meant to be delivered at the UN, or like it's not meant to play on HBO or Netflix or something like that. It's truly its own experience. And I'm glad people are confused, and I'm glad people are like, do I need to rewatch this? Rewatch it if you want to rewatch it, or don't. If you only need to see this film once and that's what you get out of it, I'm happy that you spent some time with it at all. And more than anything else, I'm just thrilled that Indian people and South Asian people have reached out to me and thanked me and just connected with me, and I have more friends that are a part of my lineage and ethnicity and ancestry now than I did before I made the film.
Just to make sure, I didn't ask for something more accessible. I think exactly the way you pointed it out, it's great that, and it opens, or it invites the desire to watch it again and to get into these contexts the way you line it out. It's great.
For sure, yeah. No, and I know you didn't. Oh no, I know you didn't directly ask the question about if it's accessible, but you touched on it a little bit in the beginning about reference points, and it's something I wanted to bring up because it's a spicy take,
How did the others, spectators, perceive the notion of us when you watched the film, without knowing Suneil's comment on it?
For me, it's the most interesting thing is that it's kind of at the same time a militant film, very much connecting and very much siding with the different movements, and succeeding to do it in a quite poetic way, not in the typical leaflet, Cinetrakt, Flugblattfilm manner. So that's really successful. I think you succeeded in doing that. On the other hand, it's a desktop work for me, and putting it in the film frame makes it less a film in my perception, because it's like sighting film. It's very nostalgic. This was the time of 60mm film. This was the epoch of the era of certain social movements and so on, yeah? We think about 68 and whatever, I don't know what to think about in India, but it's a reference to another time. And for me, it makes it less a film. It's really a desktop work for me, especially because you put it in these film frames, which is, you can't do it only on a desktop. Everybody knows that. I mean, you probably can also do it on film, but it would be very expensive and quite difficult. But on a desktop, you can do everything. So yeah, but
it actually is on 16mm.
What?
It actually is on 16mm. It's like the desktop film was then transferred to 16.
The desktop film was transferred to 16 and then again digitalized?
Yeah.
Ah. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I thought you did it on your desktop.
Some of the scenes were originally on the desktop and then transferred to 16 and then transferred back, yeah.
Why did you do that?
It was a way to actually have the material live. I mean, it's alive now, and I have it for as long as it will live. It has an expiration date, sort of now.
Okay, it's an archival idea. But why do you show the film on the screen again?
Why not just have it? Not just have it digital? Yeah, I mean, it's once again, it's a completely different experience. I mean, I tried it the way of just having the digital, kind of, and you can mask out the perforations and still have the perforations. it doesn't even come close to the feel and the uncanny, surreal quality of 16 millimeter. There's just no comparison. You know, I tried it. I was like, why spend all this time and effort on, you know, when I could just do this in After Effects or Premiere Pro, and there was also I actually, you know, I gave a lecture here a few days ago called In Search of Incoherence, and it actually had it gave the film somewhat of a coherence to the work because everything is contained within one frame, and it's literally the frame of the film. It's not just an imitation. So there's levels of imitation, and then, you know, the actual physical chemical makeup of something, and also just the poetic quality for me personally of having these things as living organisms right now in my, you know, under my couch where they're being stored right now. I mean, you know, these images are alive now, and they will be subject to the same decay that I am as a human being.
And if
they will outlive you.
They will probably outlive me. Yeah.
If I'm
good.
If I'm not mistaken, there's also certain glitches in the parts that you filmed that are typical of a 16 millimeter camera, right? That you couldn't really imitate or simulate in the digital.
Yes and no. So there are, now I'm just like revealing everything. This is, I have not said this before. But yeah, there are real glitches, and then there are glitches that I faked and then transferred to 16 millimeter to then make them real glitches. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there are moments that there are, you know, the flashes or the film burns, the burning and the, you know, the perforations all real, but the film burning and the hairs and the noise and all these things, some of it is from the film itself, and some of it is from someone else's film that I extracted and then layered on top of the digital film and then transferred to film to add an additional grain and an additional scratching and an additional burning at key moments. And yeah, I really like the fact that there's so many levels of plasticity, so many levels of removal, and, you know, the kind of uncanny and that, you know, kind of Baudrillard kind of essence of the questions of the real and its relationship to cinema and images.
One thing which connects both your films is actually the fact that you both seek, in a way, a sensation of experiencing the image. So you're not just dealing with history and political facts, but you're both seeking for an aesthetic principle guiding your films, and a level of experience is underlined in both of the works really very strongly. And we enter into spaces which are not necessarily have a spatial feeling to them. At least that was my experience as a viewer. I felt I was entering into the images, except maybe in Francina at the beginning and end of your film when you are actually moving through the space. But besides that, I felt I was traveling within images, and I was experiencing those images and exploring them. Francina, you mentioned also when we talked about your film, the way that you were trying to create a critical space, so not necessarily a realist space, but maybe a space of ideas. And I'd be really very curious about how you perceive that also in Suneil's film, and the other way around, and how Volker and Ruth, how you can connect to this idea of having a purely cinematic space, which is maybe also non-existent.
Yeah. Well, I want to say first that I was the person that later to see Suneil's film, I was like in Google seeing all the persons and the names, and I think it's really great to understand a movie also just like an extension, you know, of texts of other documents, and a work that can be related to other things too. It's not just a lonely work, you know. And I don't know, I think there is some point that I think both jobs have, that this is a really personal experience when I start to work in this film. But I think that when I start, I have like obviously an opinion of the situation, you know, like I could detect what was wrong, and I could say, have a really strong opinion of the penal system, etc. And at first, I think I felt like so far of this reality that I was really like scared of touching this, you know, like annoying the families and annoying that feelings. And I felt that the only way to contribute to discuss was like trying to show the traps and the setbacks and the fissures of this judicial process, you know. And it was really beautiful what was because we started to be approached all these years to the organizations and to the families. We start to make relationships with the mothers and the brothers and the survivors. And in some point, I also understand that I think that the pain and the suffer, it could be more carry on, more process when there are others that also legitimize that space, you know. And when I was with the families in the commemoration events that they made all the 8 of each month, and I was with they, I felt that, wow, we can put shoulders and we can put energy and we can put time to try to support in a more collective way all this pain, you know. And I think it's also like the wave of feminism. We are a group of just all women, and I think that wave was strong for us too, you know, like try to understand the emotions and the suffering in a more collective way. So I think that transformation or that difference that for me now is like a radical difference, you know, like it makes me sculpt not only point of view or like a critical opinion, but a critical place, you know, like being in the place and being in relation with the other one, and being in relation with the sounds, and being in relation with the smells of that tragedy and the words of that tragedy. And that is a really radical difference for me. And I think it was maybe allows that the films have like this plastic dimension, you know, because this sensorial journey through the history and through that political history in some way is put a network of emotions, of affections, you know, and that is possible because you are in relation with those things. And I think it's so that difference for me to have an opinion on the contrast of being in a critical place. That was for me like the big learning of this process, maybe. So that is something that unite both film, I think, you know, like this push for try to work in a more plastic way, try to be in the smallest things, try to work in the textures, because that, I think that's the power of the relationships, you know, the power of the relation with the colors, with the sounds, with the other one. So what I found really interesting in the film of Suneil too is that I think both films translate a lot the times, you know, but really in different ways. And maybe in my film there is like a more editing way of translate these times, and I think in Suneil there is like more work with the textures. And I found that these 60 millimeters frame, when I saw it, I think also like, wow, maybe I can see that format like a brush, you know, like a texture, because there's so many times that we relationated the formats with their specific times, and you have like this, oh, it's so nostalgic and 8 millimeters and history, but maybe we can also use that formats like textures, like plasticity, you know. And I found interesting how these different times were interweaved through the textures.
I think, I mean, your film, Francina, was very interesting for me because I, of course, didn't remember this incident. It was just a small, you know, 1 or 2 sentences in the news here in Europe, or at least in Austria. That's how it is, you know, very Eurocentric vision of the world. If this would have happened in New York or in Paris, we would have heard a lot about it. So that was very interesting for me to see the material. But I wonder, I know as a filmmaker, you always have to take decisions between one big decision between an aesthetic form and content. How much content do I want to put in, or how much content do I leave out to keep my form, my aesthetics decisions? Yeah. So I wondered, for me, I would have preferred to get a little bit more content, I must say.
More content?
After half an hour or 45 minutes, I got it. And the same images of the fire repeated several times. So I thought this is indulging in a kind of speculation about images. I mean, we know what fire is. So we saw it 4 or 5 times. And I wondered why there was not more about the trials, the investigation, or on the sound level, or whatever, yeah. But it, for my taste, I would have preferred to get a little bit more content after so many years, and with your intention to put together the facts, or whatever you get from the facts, what had happened. So for instance, the surveillance cameras, which all of them have a time code on them, they jump. So you, as a spectator, you don't get the time. I mean, all of this happened in 1 hour, more or less, I suppose, as far as I understood it from the time codes. But the time codes jumped. So I wondered why you didn't put it in a chronological order, the video cameras, the different cameras, to give us a sense of time. I didn't get a sense of time. Only in reflection of the film, I understood that from the moment the fire broke out till the fire brigades came, more than an hour passed. Yeah, and I think this is very important because, I mean, all what happened there, all these horrible guards who didn't do anything, this happened in a certain time frame. and the film didn't succeed to give me this time feeling of the time that passed.
So what is it? What do you mean by content? You say mentioning the facts does not necessarily imply content.
That's
Could you
true.
be more specific? What do you mean by what is the content?
This was one. Yeah, thank you, Dennis. This was one thing I missed, the feeling for the time that passed. The other thing is that in the end, there's one sentence saying all of them were acquitted. But I didn't get enough of the trial, for instance. There were very short pieces, bits and pieces on the sound level from the trial. And I mean, I would have been interested to know more about it. Who were the judges? Who were these prosecutors? Who were these people? Yeah, you know, to get a little bit more background. Maybe I don't think that in Chile everybody knows that. So I don't think that you could say this is for a Chilean audience and everybody knows everything. I mean, this is a very difficult decision to make. Yeah. To do no interviews, no whatever. I understand that from an aesthetic point of view. But in a way, I missed a little bit more of information to understand the final sentence that everybody was acquitted in the trial. You don't lead me to this sentence in the end, to this resolution, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a very difficult question always, you know, like this balance between the content and, but I think that since the first moment, we didn't have like the intention of trying to explain all the case or try to make a more journalistic investigation of this case, you know, because I think, I don't know, recently it appears a book, you know, an investigation that it's really deep. So I also make my question, so what kind of movie really contribute, you know? And I was, I mean, I think that the movie tries to make critical in a structure of the images, you know, of try to see in those images where the violence is. And you can see in different times, in different moments where the violence is, like the police officer don't want to go and the call is very late. And there are different situations where you can see also like social structure of a country, you know, you can see in those moments the difference between social classes that has been established, and you can see how the authority can exercise the power, and you can see the obstacles of the justice. And they are fragments, obviously. There are like fragments of all this big structure that is behind, that it's a country and it's a history, and it is a really heavy history, you know. But for me, that was not an objective to try to explain everything and to try to give all the information and see who is the guilty and he goes first. And that for me, like maybe the search of the narrative, it was also try to make and also a sensorial traveling, you know, not only knows specific information of the case that it obviously there, you know, it is there, and it's really important, but also try to invite the spectator to try to feel those images, you know. So yes, it is an infinite question, you know, like how can you try to make this balance? It's difficult, but well, yes, it was that intention maybe.
I think it's also a question of juggling. Go ahead.
No,
go ahead
yeah. Sorry, about the question of these jumps of the camera that you said. I think it was important in the editing process try to understand that we aren't making a chronological reconstruction. You know, we are trying to make first a reconstruction of the trial that is a different time, you know, but also trying to make these scenes or these moments in where different times can be in the same place to just touch a point. You know, for example, when the surveillance, there is a moment when different surveillance cameras just try to avoid some scenes that is happening. And in that point, I wasn't really interested of saying that all these cameras were in the same time. I was more focused on trying to reveal different moments or different patterns that I found in all this hour of tragedy, you know? So sometimes different times helps me to mark a point, you know, to try to find patterns in different moments.
Yeah, it didn't work for me. I would have preferred to make my own point. I think it took the drama out in a way. It was I think sometimes it's more dramatic. I mean, it was such a horrible situation, yeah.
But maybe that's not what she's after. The drama. Maybe that we don't always need the drama. You know.
No, but on the other hand, there is drama in showing the fire so many times.
But I think, I mean, one thing that the two films had in common, since Dennis was asking about the critical point or the criticality, I think, I mean, it's a very old-fashioned concept, authorship, but to me, it's still quite relevant to say, okay, in arranging the material, there's a certain point from which it is arranged, and authorship is maybe, I mean, this again is something that Farocki answered at one point when he was asked, okay, does he maintain something as authorship, this very shunned concept which has been beaten so many times? And he said something like, if authorship means taking responsibility for the form that you give and for the film, then yes, then this is what he claims for himself. And this kind of authorship, in both films, I had the impression that part of it is to side with or to be to show solidarity with certain people who are kind of oppressed and who are not part of the official story. In the one hand, the incarcerated and their families. On the other hand, the liberation movements in Kashmir, etc. And this was a very strong moment. But still, of course, with each of this type of films, I mean, it's not really a type, but the wager is also to show something inductively and to show a symptom which the viewer can then extrapolate and see certain structures behind this. And I think this is something which is always difficult, but I had the impression that it's successful in both cases. Like, it's very specific, it's a specific point in time, it's a specific area, it's a specific case, and in your case, it's really a case in the judicial sense. But this case is paradigmatic to a certain extent, and it is something that stands for certain failures of the state of Chile, certain inequalities, all the things that you mentioned. And of course, this is, I mean, nobody's ready when he or she has seen the film and has a complete picture. But in both cases, I felt very compelled and very incited almost to go to these places and to investigate them more. And this is quite a lot.
There was an audience comment that films are not necessarily information, and they are not necessarily similar to what a journalist piece, for example, might be. Which connects to a question I had, Ruth Beckermann, when you mention there's a lack of content in Francina's film. How is that different in Suneil's film, and why do you not feel the same desire for the fact? You're not referring to the factual, but maybe the coherence.
The reportage. Yeah.
No. I didn't say that there's a lack of content. I said that it's always a very difficult and hard decision for a filmmaker. And I understand, I'm a filmmaker myself, and I understand that we, as filmmakers, we should be on the side of the cinematographic and not the reportage and journalism and whatever you can make a book out of. Yeah, and as Francina said, there's a book coming out or came out about this case.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I would have been even also happy if Francina, if you would have shown only the surveillance cameras. It's just that at a certain, I mean, I don't need interviews, and I don't need to know everything investigative about this case, yeah? Although it's very interesting and horrible. But what confused me or frustrated me at a certain point was the way it was, for instance, I didn't get this point of yours that you put this different surveillance cameras from different moments with different time codes together to show me something. I didn't get it. I'm sorry. Maybe you got it. I didn't get it. And I thought, why is she doing this? Yeah. In other moments,
I mean, sorry, I have to make this question. But in the part that I was telling about this moment where the surveillance camera turns away, I mean, it's a point that it,
yes,
in different moments when the camera didn't want to see that.
This was very strong. There were very strong moments. For instance, when the guy calls the hospital and the doctor, as you mentioned, class here, hierarchy, the doctor just puts the phone down, yeah? I mean, they were amazing.
In that particular moment, there were different time codes, you know?
Yeah, but that's very confusing, I must say.
Okay.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm curious. What is the difference? What is the difference between the two films, which brings us in this completely different relation to the factual and the historical? Is it the point that Suneil's film is so closely anchored in his biography that he is more liberated from creating coherence on a historical level?
Yeah.
Is it that for you? I'm very curious about it. Yeah.
Exactly. In Suneil's film, he's free. It's very subjective. He can do whatever he wants. Some moments you follow him more. Some moments you don't follow him. For instance, the mountains for me were, in the end, were less interesting. Other moments were extremely interesting. But you just let it go. And in your film, every moment is so important because it's about life and death. I mean, it's very dramatic. If you make it more or less dramatic, the whole situation is a drama, yeah? And unbelievable how these guys react, how these guards act, and so on. So you are really excited because of the topic. So you're less free in your montage.
Could I ask one more question also concerning Francina's films, concerning the soundtrack? Because I was struck by the fact that on the image layer, there's so many aspects that to a certain extent protect the victims. I mean, there's this pixelation, nobody's really exploited visually, nobody's exposed again for a second time in your film via different means. And in the soundtrack, I was so struck by this moment when you see I think it's a panorama shot of the prison from quite far away with burning already. And then on the soundtrack, you have those voices crying, "Open the gates, I'm burning," and things like this. And I thought, wow, this is, I mean, what I'm listening to is literally maybe the moment of death. And I thought this is really strong, but I also asked myself if you had any reservations or if you thought about, let's say, adding something to create some kind of distance, the distance that the images have to a certain extent, because they're less, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting point, because for us, it's important to be careful with the identities of the victims, you know. This was a case that when happens, there were a lot of images that appears in television in a very spectacular way. So it was really important for us to try to protect the victims and not expose them again and again, you know. And also I think that, well, you are every time you are working with these kinds of images that are so difficult to see, you know, I think one of the question is, how can I show this without being in a melodramatic place, you know? How can I, for one hand, try to explain something, but also try to travel through these emotions? So that point, it was really important, you know, try to protect that. And because also death has something really difficult to put the distance, you know, at what point I put me to see death. It's and it's really difficult to try to find that point. And I think it's our responsibility try to do it also, you know. It is a responsibility try to assume and try to see these images, despite they are so difficult to see, you know. But one of the really things that I have very clear was that I didn't get necessary to see faces of the victims, you know. And I think that happens in the scene that you are talking with these yells. And it was really shocking when I saw that image for the first time, because original, the registration, you could hear like the screamings and also the birds. And that combination was so brutal, you know, was like something in your stomach so deep, like there was like a poetry thing, but a really death mark, you know. And it was weird because you could see really far this building, but you can hear clearly the screams. And that was a composed original of the register. And there was something that later we could work in another images, you know, like we can understand this operation that is so powerful, to see something that is like blurred and to have a really well sound. So this distance between the image and the sound was important to protect death, you know, to protect the idea of a pornography of the horror, you know. I mean, I think the distance sometimes is good, you know. I think sometimes it's good to try to really see things, and sometimes it's good to try to search these particular points of distance. So it was a really work and a really search of this theme. I think it's not something just so rigid, but it's something that we were thinking all the time.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that you know, essentially both of these works are about exactly that, about the mediation of images, between images and violence, and the apparatuses that enable that mediation. For Francina's film, it's the images of the surveillance cameras that not only are we watching those images, but those were the same images that the prisoners were also watching, that then made decisions to, operate the camera, to do or do not do something. In my instance, it's the mediation is a mediation of between interface. I mean, but actually both of these are there's a lot to do with the interface. But I think at the heart of what we're doing is not the very clearly not the reportage, not the journalism, and not the narration. And it's interesting that Ruth brings up that I might have a little bit more leeway because it's so subjective and so personal. But I do think it's that Francina's choice to focus on the like detritus of what happened at that fire, as opposed to the events themselves. I mean, you have different levels of mediation and removal in her film. You have the reenactments, and you have the surveillance. You have all these different components, as well as the apparatus of the editing of the film and the sound, and these a little bit more manipulative moments that all films have to some degree. And I think that where I see that in my work too is the it's a lot of the mediation of, like, for instance, like listening to podcasts about these mass unmarked graves in Kashmir. Basically it's not me reporting on information, it's someone else reporting on information and me listening to it and me recording and documenting that listening, and then replaying it, right, and replaying it over another image. And so there's like selections of media, of literal media, that then go to try and comprehend the violence. And I think Francina is doing something similar in a lot of ways. Like, how are we able to comprehend the magnitude of the suffering that occurred, not through the grotesque, but through the banal, through the mundane? How are we able to, and that would be so, that's so far different than if we had the information, if we had logical. I don't think that affect of the banal, of the image, of the mundane image, and going back to like maybe like something like Hitoshtaro, the poor image, right, the pixelated image, how much that reveals about what our experience of suffering. I think I might have glitched a little bit there, but
no worries. How is this all connected to the fact that prisons are something which is extremely present in cinema and of which we have seen so many images already? And we know, in a way, the investigation on a cinematic level, although the real incident has its own rules, and how, Suneil, in your film, there's some images which are not so much part of the canon of images, at least in the West. People are familiar with, because these films obviously are not floating in the air, they are also connecting with our visual memory. How is this connected to how you see these films?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go.
There was this one point that Francina mentioned earlier on, that for these both the tracking shots, the first one and the last one of her film, this looks so unprison-like, and I think you mentioned that we have all these stereotyped images of, okay, everything's made of metal and everything is has this aseptic quality to it. And to me, this was also the gesture of saying, okay, prisons, I mean, the living conditions in prisons, they in many cases have nothing to do with what we know from a Robert Bresson film, or even more recent films that are set in prisons. And this was also something that seemed quite remarkable in the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, try to make a link with what Dennis was saying, that also I think I have the challenge to try to put these really weird images, because they are weird, you don't have in your memory or in your mind like that type of reconstructions, you know, or the scientific reconstructions. Maybe the camera surveillance, yeah, it's something that we can like recognize fast, but these other operational images are a little bit strange, you know, and it's also very particular of each country, you know, that system of make evidence, because you finally, I think you can think like, how can you make an evidence? It's really weird. And I remember that when I started, I researched like in the web of the police investigation, and they have the courses of the audiovisual polices, you know, they have to take a course of audiovisual police investigation. And they had like, for example, the first course was Objectivity 1, like how to make an objective image, you know, and it was so crazy, the explanation. So they were making objective images and they failed so many times in that trying. So I think it was a challenge, try to put these strange original archives in an structure, in a narrative structure. But finally, I think that maybe the film can be really focused on try to understand the origin of each archive, you know, of each evidence, like who is filming that, you know. Surveillance camera is trying to control people, is trying to make an objective facts, and the cellular of the neighborhood is trying to just try to shoot something in that really crazy moment. So different formats have different intentions and different emotions. And I think that was the necessary for me, you know, just not try to know exactly to what hierarchy it belongs, but to try to understand their objectives, you know, their intentions. I don't know if that was the question.
So if I got it, well, you were referring to the objective of the cameras themselves in the end. Did I get that right?
Yeah, the intentions of each.
Yeah, I mean like the intention of like each image, of each format, you know. Like surveillance camera has a clearly intention, the reconstruction has a clearly intention, and that could reveals in each image, you know, in details, in pixel zones, you know, in all those insignificant elements of the image. You can have the information and the marks of this violence finally, and of this oppression of the image. And yeah.
So what you're referring to is the fact that you were using images which were not necessarily, they were automatic images, right? And not necessarily images driven by a human intention, but maybe a technical intention or an abstract purpose, which was then reinvented by your film. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and I think there's always like this, there's always like this relationship between the machine and the hand, you know, like these surveillance cameras that makes in some way an enclosed that is really abstract finally, but at the end there is like a man behind that camera that is changing the position. So it's not just that machine, is the intention of the hand that is behind. And I think that there is finally the question of the film.
I liked Suneil's proposition almost. We could rephrase the discussion into interfacing traces maybe this would be more appropriate in face interfaces, because it's true that the interfaces are quite prominent, and it's always, I mean, the interface is the, let's say, it's the threshold that decides also about the character that this violence has. Is it a violence that is inflicted, or is it a violence that is criticized? Is it a violence that is revealed, etc.? And I think it has a lot to do with the question of the interface that Suneil brought up.
Yeah, and I also think that Francina just mentioned the hand of the operator, right? If these are operational images, who's the operator? You know, so I think that that's kind of that goes to both in Francina's instance, the hand of the prison guard or of the surveiller. And in my case, my hand, you know, my artistic hand. I mean, Francina also has an artistic hand in her film, but literally my hand, you know, it was placing, you know, the flower petals, scratching on the film, you know, hand processing the film. Like these are the types of things that are very revealed. I mean, I'm in the film myself, and my face has like this, you know, filter on it, and you know, so there's all sorts of literal hands and that are in the film, the hands of the artist. Maybe they're not literal actually, but I think it's an interesting way to look at that, is through questions of mediation and artifice, but also of this manipulation that we you know, at the beginning of the conversation we talked about manipulation as well, and I mean, all film is manipulation, right? Like all editing is manipulation. So there's many different levels of manipulation going on. There's manipulation within the sound, you know, like the sound of the soundtrack, you know, these are very manipulative techniques to make us feel something, you know, to make us want to cry or get angry or whatever we want to, you know, however we want to position the music to make the audience react in a way that we prescribe. So yeah, lots of different types of manipulation going on, I think, too.
And yeah, the human
film is a film about manipulation. I mean, that's the subject, it's the topic of the film, manipulation. That's why it's so difficult to make, to distinguish between the manipulation that was already made by the different cameras that recorded at this spot there, and her manipulation, the manipulation of the author and the filmmaker, because there are several levels of manipulation. So at a certain, I mean, you don't know, did the author put this sound with this image, or was this sound on this image? Sometimes you know, sometimes you don't know. So you are kind of, there's another kind of manipulation on top of all of the others, which is a very sensitive topic, I think. Because how are we manipulating the, again, and actually we want to show that the others manipulate for a certain purpose.
I think that's my favorite thing about film. Like that it's just like, that's a given, you know, that like all film is manipulative, and you know, like how manipulative are you going to be is the question. But also I think that's what's so strong about Francina's film, is that there's multiple levels of manipulation. And you know, it's not a video installation, right? It's not like Francina didn't just show the footage you know, for 1 hour or for the duration of however long the film. I mean, I liked that Ruth brought that up, this question of time, you know, because in essence, while from the beginning your film starts to when we finished the film, all those people, you know, theoretically, or the people who were there for however long it took for the guards to leave, burned. And so that, you know, our experience of watching your film in the amount of time that it took to, you know, watch the film, this horrendous thing happened, you know. So I think that that's kind of what Ruth was referring to and trying to understand that time. But that's a more conceptual question, and I don't think that's what you were going for. You could have made that, or someone else could have made that, or someone else will make that, I don't know. But yeah, so that's, I mean, that's not what you focused on. So what you did focus on was something else entirely, which is the images. You know, you didn't focus on time, you focused on images. And so if you had focused on time and images, I don't know if it's...
Excuse me, but film is images in time.
Yeah.
There is always time, because you do make a montage and you don't see just images. This is not an exhibition. This is a film.
Yeah.
So you make decisions to put the images in a time slot.
But I think that there is something interesting in what is saying Suneil, that also the actions can mark the time, you know, like knowing since the beginning that there are people that is burning inside this prison, obviously put a time, you know, a translation. And when the prisoners' testimony in these reconstructions, they talk about the time, all time, you know, like 20 minutes before, and he told me 10 minutes after, and I remember that. And I think that is also really important in this type of tragedy, because there are also like a subjective time, like the time that prisoners feels inside the prison is not the same time that the surveillance camera feels or that the television put. There are really subjective times, and I think that is important, but because it demands us to find new narratives and to find new forms to try to express these different feelings of times, because that also reveals the powerness between in all this structure, you know. The time that passed the police officer is not the same as the prisoner. So in that point, I was more focused on trying to touch and try to travel through all these different experiences, you know, and these experiences are always subjective. So it was like not very useful for me to try to make a work with just an only time, just a chronological time, and because I couldn't travel through all these different spaces. And there was also like a spirit of try to be more subjective with these archives that were so cold and with an intention of so many objective, you know, and trying back the thing that we were talking about, this thing that says Farocki of trying to appropriate us to these violence images. I think a way to try to appropriate of that is trying to work with subjectivity, with the subjectivity of the victims, of the families. So yeah, it was an editing that tried to put in game different times. I mean, different times of the registers, you know, because the reconstruction, it was like 1 week later of this tragedy, and the camera surveillance was in that real moment, and the trial was 3 years after this tragedy. So there are not only different types of times in the different images, but also in the different experiences of each person that was in the tragedy.
So yeah,
I mean, there are many topics coming up, like the question of showing violent images. I mean, is it? I mean, I understand what Farocki said, but I think he didn't want to say that if we are showing it from the side of the victims, then it's okay to show these extremely violent images. I mean, this is also a very sensitive topic. I mean, how do we deal with violent images in our films that should be different than TV or other media? How about showing them or not showing them? I mean, this is not directly connected to your films, but it's just a question that comes up because we talk so much about violent images.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also fascinating to wonder about the fact how an image can in the end of your film, Francina, the inmates are relating to the fact that they cannot unsee something they have seen, how the image can how the image cannot be unseen, how it cannot be erased anymore. So this whole notion of tracing back an image is one thing, but the image itself is also something which leaves a trace in us and which we cannot forget anymore. And this is something which is really much connected to how your two films work on the level of experience, how it's also maybe possible for your films to overcome the fact that they are relating to a past and that they maybe are capable of creating a friction here in the now and relate to our subjectivity here and now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in terms of subjectivity, just one more note that I picked up on is that line in Francina's film where someone asked I think it was one of the guards, did you notice anything, abnormal, or did you notice anything unusual? And he goes, no. And then the camera person says, well, maybe your normal is different than my normal, And I thought that was really revealing about the subjectivity of the different registers of subjectivity that exist within the work. Yeah.
So I guess after realizing that we need to change the title of this evening to interfacing traces and discovering so many different subjectivities, I wanna thank you all for sharing your insights into your own practice and on each other's work. And Volker and Ruth, thank you so much for being our spectators here and helping us discover these two films together as a group. And it was massively interesting, I think, and there's so many lines of thought we should all follow and continue. So this was only the first of a couple of conversations we're about to have in the frame of Critics Week this year. Thank you all again very much, Volker Pantenburg, Francina Carbonell, Suneil Sanzgiri, and Ruth Beckermann. And I hope you will discover the rest of our program together with us, and also discuss with us the other evenings and send us some questions if you're following. So I hope to see you soon, and I wish you a wonderful day and evening, and goodbye. Thank you for being
all.
with us.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Nice
yes.
to meet you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And to the audience as well, I wish you all a wonderful Monday evening. For us, it feels actually really like a festival week, and we are constantly active and inventing new formats. Soon we will unveil a new one, and I also wanted to mention that alongside our debates and film programs, there's also a full-fledged online magazine which we launched today, and also a blog which will accompany all of our screenings. So you will be able to read comments on the debates we had on the next day in the frame of our blog. We are always hiring, we are asking people to external voices, critics from around the world to react to our debates and frame them independently. So sometimes the reactions are very surprising, and I want to invite you to follow the magazine and the blog. Alongside Critics Week, you will also be able to discover quite a few comments on the films we are showing. Yeah, personally, I haven't read all of them, so I'm also curious to read the rest of them. They are still coming in, and I hope to see you during the next evenings, and want to wish you a good night. Goodbye.